Trinidad and Tobago saw as many of its young men enlisting in various corps to fight for their monarch. They came from all backgrounds, ranging from poor black men merely looking for an opportunity to the sons of rich planters who felt that they would return covered in glory. A large number left their bones in lonely war graves in Europe. Given the terrible casualties that were reported, in all over 200 men from Trinidad and Tobago lost their lives. A public meeting chaired by the then mayor of Port of Spain, Dr. Enrique Prada, was held at the Princess Building on the 4th of August 1916 to discuss a permanent memorial to the deceased. This consultation was attended by the Governor, Sir John Chancellor, and though the idea was approved, it was decided to wait until the war ended to implement this. It was not until 1918 that the project was revived, and at a public conference in 1919, the suggestion was made that the monument should be erected in Marine Square, Independence Square, in the area now occupied by the Cipriani statue. Strenuous objection to this site led to another location being earmarked, this being the Little Savannah, which was then an open pasture opposite the Royal Victoria Institute, known as the National Museum today. Sir John Chancellor's successor, a governor, Sir Samuel Wilson, approved the transfer of the Little Savannah to the Port of Spain City Council to initiate it. The foundation stone of the cenotaph was laid on the 1st of May 1924 by Sir Samuel Wilson, with a time capsule containing the history of the project as well as newspaper clippings and coins being inserted. The monument was described in the Port of Spain Gazette as followed. Made of Portland stone and bronze, with a set of 4 granite steps around the base, constructed on a solid circular concrete foundation about 18 feet across. Standing squarely on the granite steps is the massive base of the column, led into which are the bronze panels engraved with the names of the fallen, some 168 in number. Rising immediately above this are 3 emblematic groups of statuary, one in the front and on either side. The front represents courage, the figure of a soldier armed with a rifle standing guard over and defending a dying comrade who lies on the ground at his feet. The side groups are the prows of the ships, emblematic of the part taken in the war by the Royal Navy and the Mercantile Marine. And on each is seated a female figure. The one on the south is a pensive attitude reading the scroll of fame. The other on the north, a Red Cross nurse bearing a laurel wreath emblematic of the tender care of the sick and the fallen. To the rear of the base is a group of trophies massed together and surmounted by arms of the colony and the royal crown supported by the flags of the empire with a trident in the rear. Rising clear out of its base is the beautiful tall column of pure white Portland stone, to a height of nearly 42 feet, surmounted by a carved stone frieze with lion's head at the 4 corners. The whole is surmounted by a winged figure of victory, cast in bronze, standing on a globe commemorative of the worldwide conflict and bearing in one outstretched arm the wreath of sacrifice and in the other the victor's palm. At the end of World War II, 180 more names were added to the memorial in honor of those soldiers who lost their lives during the conflict. Since then, there have been no structural changes to this monument, which serves to remind us all that these men and women made the ultimate sacrifice for God king and the country.
Very few people in Trinidad and Tobago realize just how many of their countrymen were in uniform during World War II. I tell you, no less than 30,000, 6,000 of them serving with British and Canadian forces overseas. 1939, and the massive German army has invaded Poland under orders from Adolf Hitler to march then on the whole of Europe. 1940, Hitler ignores Britain's final demand to withdraw from Poland, leaving Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain no alternative.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us. I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany.
December 1941, Japan joins Germany in the war and attacks the United States. The battle to control the Atlantic is on. Trinidad becomes of strategic importance to both sides. The oil refinery at Pointe-à-Pierre and the Gulf of Paria are crucial to military supplies, especially the Americans.
When the Japanese hit them at Pearl Harbor, every American was screaming for revenge against Japan.
Gaylord Kelshaw, curator of the Military History and Aviation Museum he started at Chaguaramas, guides us through the rapid growth of the American Army in Trinidad.
Now, when we're talking about Trinidad and World War II, we're talking about two completely different subjects. One being the Trinidadians who left here to go and fight abroad, all over the world for that matter. Right? They were in all the services, in all the theaters, you know. And the second distinct subject is Trinidad itself in World War II. And that divides into five basic areas. The first one being that this piece of water out here, the Gulf of Paria, is the largest natural harbor in the Western Hemisphere. And it's enclosed and it's defendable. So it became the natural terminus of the North Atlantic convoy route in the Battle of the Atlantic. And the Battle of the Atlantic was the most critical battle of the whole 20th century. There's nothing that could not be lost like that one, you know, the Battle of the Atlantic. And we were the southern terminus of the convoy route for World War II. So what took place here in the Gulf of Paria was just as important as what took place in the wastes of the North Atlantic, you know, or off the British ports in England. Right? So as the terminus, it became the hub for merchant ships. They would come from all over the southern hemisphere and gather here. And when they gathered into a convoy, they left here to go up through the Windward Passage to the US East Coast. From there, across the Atlantic to either Britain or Russia. The empty ships on the way back would drop off at various ports and so, but some of them would end up here as the terminus and leave from here to go to other ports in the southern hemisphere. Right? Now that ties in almost exactly with the second one, which is the importance of Trinidad. And that revolves around oil. Today, when you think of oil, you think of the Middle East, vast quantities of oil coming out of the Middle East and all over the world for that matter. In those days, Middle East oil hadn't been discovered. Right? For example, the Kuwait oil fields didn't come into being until 1948, right, when the first one was drilled. So we had almost a monopoly on oil.
Vital to the island's economy is its petroleum industry. Oil was first discovered late in the 19th century, but it was not until the British Navy in 1917 switched from coal to oil for its power did the industry begin large-scale development. Giant symbol of this great industry is the glittering face of the Point-Pier refinery, which forms an impressive approach to the principal southern town, San Fernando.
The refinery at Point-Pier was the largest in the British Empire. Right? And the oil refinery on the island of Aruba, just beyond here, was the largest in the world. Right? So the oil that kept the machine of war going came from this area. Right? That meant that the local forces in Trinidad were greatly expanded in World War II. Alongside them, you had the Americans. The Americans initially came here to make Trinidad the southern anchor of a ring of defenses 1,000 miles out from the Panama Canal to guard the Panama Canal. Right? The Trinidad was the southern anchor, and the bases went to Lucia, Antigua, Bahamas in a ring 1,000 miles out, so that you could defend 1,000 miles from the actual target, which is the Panama Canal. Right? They started off by putting down 2 bases, and most people believe that that is where the American involvement came and went. But while this was going on, the Germans were fighting the Battle of the Atlantic, and they were looking for the easiest places to sink tankers above all, because tankers carried the oil. And when America got involved in the war, the German U-boats came to the Caribbean. And the Caribbean became a major theater of war. 250 ships sunk just around Trinidad, just in the waters around Trinidad. 7,000 men killed just around our coast.
Mr. John Salamby was a young coxswain attached to the Customs Department and remembers the night of February the 19th, 1942, when the Germans attacked.
I was born on the 8th of August 1918. I worked at the Customs in 1941. Whilst on duty, 2 ships were out of the harbor. It was merchant ships. Used to come and bring cargo for Trinidad. Whilst on duty, about midnight, we heard 2 loud explosions. And then siren starts blowing from outside in the sea. We tried to find out what happened. In a little while, small boats started bringing injured men from the ship. 2 ships. They were torpedoed. It's American ships. They were torpedoed. And the men were taken to the hospital. Now, in the morning, Superintendent Barnes sent to call me from the Customs, being a coxswain, captain of the launch. We sailed around the ship. We went around the first ship. We saw what happened. We went around the second ship. We again saw what happened. And what we saw is big holes, 1 big hole in each ship. They measured in diameter about 10 feet. And both ships were listed on the right side. Listed on the right side, from which it got torpedoed.
Patriotism ran rampant, and there was no shortage of West Indians wanting to do their share towards the war effort. The German U-boats are crippling merchant shipping. On land, there are now 20,000 Trinidadians in the Civil Defence Force. Among the rest, there's no shortage of labour for Uncle Sam to hire.
The American bases mushroomed from 2 to 225. So in World War II, there were 225 individual American bases in Trinidad. Just Trinidad alone, we're not counting Tobago, right? It's just Trinidad alone, 225 bases. The manpower jumped from 12,000 at the start to a normal garrison of 82,000. 82,000 Americans here.
Then, in 1943, the Americans decided they had to invade Martinique, because Martinique was Vichy French controlled, and Trinidad was assigned as the invasion staging base. So here you had the support ships, battleships, aircraft carriers, landing craft, the attack transports, plus the 4 regiments that were assigned to invade Martinique. Martinique was controlled by the pro-German puppet government of Vichy France, and America could not get the Vichy French in Martinique to change allegiance.
The garrison here, during that period, March to August 1943, rose to 135,000 Americans. Right, now, if you look at the population of Trinidad, at that time, it was 450,000 people. Take 130,000 Americans and add them to that, and you get an indication of what Trinidad was like. I mean, that's 1 in 3. A minimum of 1 in 3, right? 1 person in every 3 was an American. So that gives you an idea why the Trinidadian is so much like the American, much more like the American than the rest of the Caribbean. Right? It comes from that contact that changed Trinidad for good. Right? They've never been the same since then. Because, you know, with that volume of people, of men, all looking for relaxation, recreation. It's the start of the entertainment industry, which today dominates Trinidad.
But it was not all sea, sun and fun, as the U-boat battle would intensify, and the Germans knew the area well. In fact, the Germans were coming to the islands long before the war even started.
This became the anti-submarine base for the Caribbean, the largest anti-submarine base in the Caribbean. So here you had based destroyers, destroyer escorts, submarine hunters, and aircraft, a lot of aircraft, combat aircraft based here to carry the fight. Because in May 1942, more ships were sunk in the Caribbean than anywhere else in the world. In fact, 70% of the ships sunk worldwide were sunk in the Caribbean. So it was crisis. It was a crisis time. Had to stop the Germans. Otherwise, they could have won the Battle of the Atlantic right here in the Caribbean by destroying what was here, what they could find here. They would ignore the North Atlantic, you know, just tackle the Caribbean and cut off the supplies at its source. So the battle for the Caribbean was waged between, say, February 42 and the end of August 43, the real major battle. Right? And that meant that where you had 1 American squadron in 42, you had about 10 or 12 by 43. Right? They're just constantly reinforcing here. Where you had 1 destroyer attached to Chaguaramas Naval Station in 42, you have about 20 attached in 43. You're constantly reinforcing to get to 130,000 Americans. You know? And a lot of people lost their lives, not just the seamen in the merchant ships, but air crew from aircraft that were shot down by the submarines. Right? Ships that were sunk, warships that were sunk. It was quite a heavy loss of life, because in 1943 the Germans changed their operating procedure. Prior to that, if a submarine spotted an aircraft, it dived. But from the time the captain of the submarine went down into the submarine and closed the hatch, to the time when the submarine completely disappeared, there was a time lag. And in that time lag is when the aircraft would come in and drop its depth charges. But the Germans decided to put a lot of anti-aircraft guns on the submarine and tell the submarine captains, don't run, stand up and fight. And it was known as the fight back order. And it took the Caribbean by surprise. You know, when these fellas turned the aircraft towards the German submarines, all of a sudden, instead of running, the submarine put some fearsome barrage. Right? Down, scratched one aircraft, right? So because the aircraft couldn't cope with that at all. Most of the aircraft were flying boats and so slow, you know, lumbering, big targets. They didn't have too much chance. Once the Germans stood to fight, so the pilot would then have to learn a new set of tactics, how to feint and turn back, and feint and turn back, and feint and turn back to make the submarine use up its ammunition. The submarine would learn a new set of tactics, and now you turn back, now dive. Right? So by the time he turns back in, we're going, you know. So it was like a cat and mouse game between both sides. And both sides lost. German submarines were caught and sunk. American aircraft were torn out of the sky. So the battle raged, the real battle. The Germans were in the Caribbean almost up to the end of the war, mind you, but the real fight was that period I spoke about, between 42 43. They didn't stop coming here, but they stopped trying to win it here, you know, after August 1943, which had cost the Americans not so much in men killed and whatnot as in resources assigned to the Caribbean. You know, where it was intended at the start with a minor little thing, a few men here and a few ships there and whatnot. That's where we ended up with 225 bases, because it was a major commitment.
Well, there you have it, our first glimpse of Trinidad and Tobago's important role during World War II. In our next episode, we'll look at the deadly game of espionage against Nazi spies and sympathizers operating in Trinidad. And we'll talk to those who still remember. The Road to Hell, the first jungle warfare training camp. Journey with us as we explore Wallerfield, the largest US airfield base in the Western Hemisphere. At that time, all of which were in Trinidad.